Welcome to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce seminar on 2023 Mid-Year Trade Forecast, Perspective and Insights for Brazil and Beyond. My name is Renato Tichauer, and I'm CEO of Tremond Metals Corp, a 30 years old trading and mining company, and I'm at the board of directors of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. Here, this shows the Brazil export total and Brazil export to the United States. And we can see here that the total exports from to the United States has been approximately 13, 14, 10% of the total export. So Brazil has been, United States has been an export partner of Brazil in around 10%. This is the reverse situation. Brazilian imports from the United States. Total value, Brazil imports from the United States. Again, we have the 13 to 10% range. So what I want to show as an introduction is that the participation of Brazil in trade with the United States is really very small. And this is very surprising, being, of course, the United States, the biggest economy in the world. And I don't have figures for a relationship with other countries like China, for instance, that is very strong with Brazil. But it shows that in relation to the United States, we are a rather small participant. Here it shows the trade deficit with the United States. In 2018 was $8.2 billion, 11.9 billion, and in 2001, 15.7, 2022, $14.9 billion deficit. Meaning, of course, that Brazil is importing more from the United States than exporting.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to leverage Renato's presentation. I have not a deck for presenting so well structured as him, but I will leverage on putting a perspective, I would say, on this trade relationship and how it is impacting today the Brazilian business environment, right? We are seeing definitely a new concept and how Brazil is positioning itself internationally since the beginning of this year, not only in terms of ESG terms, but also in terms of being closer and partner internationally with all countries. This is affecting very much the investments and the markets in Brazil, right? As an M&A person, what we are seeing is that although the global M&A markets is going down by around 15% in terms of numbers of deals announced, right? And Latin America is going down by around 33% in terms of numbers of deals announced in the region. Brazil, aligned with the global status, is going around 13% in terms of deals announced during the year to date, right? We expect this year to ramp up again and go back to around the 1,600 deals announced in the country. And one of the reasons is the attractiveness that the country is having internationally, right? If you see today, as globally, right, the capital markets in Brazil is not performing well. We are starting to see these last weeks and have a good perspective for the coming ones. Selected follow-on operations, right? The market is ramping up again. Of course, a lot of distressed operations, right? And that capital markets is quite active today, even with high interest rates. Remember that Brazil has a basic interest rate of 13.75%. So lenders and borrowers are being run around 20 or plus 20% per year in Brazil now, with inflation around 4 or 5%. So the debt capital markets is quite active in terms of restructuring, but we're starting to see back the capital markets running with selected case, very selective markets, a lot of follow-ons, still not IPOs, but we expect by the end of the year to come back with IPOs. And this is going to impact back the M&A market. That's why we see the same level of 1,600 deals announced during the year that we had past year happening again this year. When one of the reasons, and catching back with Renato's presentation, right, is how Brazil is positioning itself internationally for the trade and for the international community, right? We are seeing definitely Brazil is very bold on agribusiness, right? It represents around 1/3 of the GDP, and on the commodities. So the recovery of the international markets in both volume and price of the items, right, is impacting very much the trade in Brazil. And this is bringing back international investors to the country. Although today the international investors represent around 40% of the M&A activity in the country, we expect that during the next months and years, it should come back to what was in prior years, around 50 to 55% of the announced deals. So definitely international investors, because of the size of Brazil and I would say again, agribusiness and commodities exports and trade are very relevant, right? As a country of raw material supplies to the world, right? This is affecting very much the trade of Brazil. You have to have in mind that this is in parallel with the internal market, right? That is coming back again as consumption is growing up in Brazil. What we are facing today, and this affects less the trade, I would say, is the relevance of the services market that is still experiencing high inflation and lower demand. So today, Brazil continues to be very robust in terms of its exporters and raw material exporters, right? And this is affecting, as Renato showed, the trade balance of the country in positive terms. What we do believe is that the country is restructuring itself, right, to be more attractive. And I will stop there, Laura, not for going and waiting for the Q&A, so I don't say everything. Is how the country is restructuring itself and creating a more attractive environment for the business and investments, right? Not only for the local investments in terms of regulations, but also for foreign investors in terms of seeing how the country can be a secure place for investment. So in overall, I just want to make this link between the trade and how the country is positioning itself, right? And the M&A and investments activities ramping up again as the country positions itself as a good place for the investments and as a trade and exporter of goods and services.
Thank you, Laura, and thanks, Renato and Alexandre. I'll try to continue here in the logic sequence, and I think I can give you, from the industry perspective, a bit of the agenda that we believe Brazil could proceed or embark, which is very much aligned to what has been said up to now in terms of challenges and opportunities. So maybe just trying to understand this current agenda, and we are just completing 6 months of this big governmental change. We don't have many issues that can go forward at this moment. There is clearly a good balance between the powers in Brazil. Congress has a different flavor than the presidency or the executive power, and the judicial, the legal power is also very active in Brazil. So when you think about what could happen, there's not many things that could, and that's not bad. That seems to be good, that we could focus on a relevant agenda. So the first item, which I think we're close to finish here in Brazil, is this so-called arcabouço or fiscal rule, which is key to avoid the loss of control. Alexandre was just mentioning that we have a 13.75 basic rate, like Europe is around 3 point something, US is around 5 point something. And we have been below those areas in terms of inflation for the last many months. Alexandre mentioned around 4, but with today's data that is preliminary for the months of June, we are really at around 3 annualized inflation rate. So we do have the highest real interest rates in the world for a good period of time, probably around already 12 months or so. So all this investment potential, of course, is blocked. You don't find many areas where you could invest at this discount rate as a basic rate plus spreads plus taxes, etc., to pay back on a normal business. So this fiscal rule is very, very important, is more flexible than in the past, but somehow it could survive more than we could see the so-called ceiling of expenses, which was a very interesting rule, but because of the natural political challenges of a developing country plus the pandemic, we really crossed the ceiling very soon, and then the rule itself lost its credibility. So hopefully now in the next few weeks, this is already done in the lower chamber of Congress, and we should conclude soon. Somehow it came back to the lower chamber and should be done in the next few weeks. That's my belief, and that's very helpful. And as I usually say, if you would plug a normal macroeconomy in Brazil, and coming to Renato's point of what went wrong here, of course, there are many things that went wrong in the last 30, 40 years. But one clear thing is that if we did have a normal macroeconomic, meaning normal interest rates and so many other things, normal macroeconomic features, most probably we would have a much better result than we did. We had this crazy inflation for part of the time, then growing public deficits and a very hard time to keep interest rates under control. And when you have interest rates like we're having now, the next movement is to have a super valued currency, which is not very good for trading. So it's a very complex situation, and hopefully we can start to move in a better way on this front. Of course, this reindustrialization and the overall policies for Brazil, they have to focus on digitalization, the environment protection, and decarbonization. Those are central axes to whatever we do here. And this is very important, not only because of buzzwords and contemporary thinking, ESG, because Brazil is effectively the biggest powerhouse in the world for decarbonization and the easiest place in the world to achieve most of those targets that will be so supportive for global development and could reposition Brazil. And this is a big shift because a few years ago, recently, we are not really giving attention to this agenda from an institutional standpoint, and hopefully we can turn that and generate a lot of value to the Brazilian society, a lot of social, economic development by doing the right thing. So you have the best of both worlds, and it's an amazing opportunity for Brazil. I do believe, and even having talks with the new Brazilian ambassador, the new US ambassador here in Brazil, we need to refresh the agenda. As I told you, for instance, today, the big issue in the international agenda of Brazil, the positive international agenda, is to do an agreement with the European Union through Mercosur. The international debate between Brazil and US right now is very polluted, and we have more negatives than positives, maybe because of Brazil, maybe because of US, doesn't matter, and would be very helpful if we could bring into this Brazil integration to the world, to the issue of the decarbonization, and to so many of these interesting debates, a new agenda, a new initiative. On my view, by going through the agreement with the European Union would be very helpful if USMCA and Mercosur or Brazil-US would restart talks about doing something in similar lines. These conversations take 10 years to occur, but we would get a positive track rather than having somehow only negative tracks. So that's my view of how can we improve the agenda, align with the basic things that Brazil has to do to be a more interesting place in the world.
And so from a U.S. trade perspective, on the Biden trade policy, which was recently announced very clearly by his U.S. trade representative, I mean, already we saw under the Trump administration a chilling of the relationship with China. We had additional duties for imports into the US for products from China. Then we had the pandemic, where everyone saw the fragility of supply chains, particularly with sensitive products. So I think it's fair to say that the US now has a cold trade war with China. And also, this administration is very clear that there's a push for nearshoring and for domestic manufacturing, which I think can be a benefit for Latin America. So, and as I mentioned, the US Trade Representative Catherine Tai recently spoke and very clearly enunciated the Biden administration trade policy, and very clearly said, we are moving to protect domestic industry and increase domestic manufacturing. Their view is that free trade has harmed the United States, and the focus of their trade policy is on US workers and on small business, not on big corporations. I would say pre-Trump, this started under Trump as well. Pre-Trump, it was very much the attitude in the United States was very much in favor of free trade, and it was a bipartisan trade policy for free trade. And companies set up global supply chains with efficiencies, cost of goods was reduced, and there were numerous free trade agreements that the US set forth. I don't think we're going to see any new free trade agreements from this administration. So it's unfortunate, I think, as Dan mentioned, a Mercosur-US or Mercosur-USMCA free trade agreement, I think would be terrific, but I don't think we're going to see that. I don't think we're going to see that from this administration. And just now I did check before, imports from Brazil account for 1.2% of all imports into the United States. And Brazil is currently the 17th largest supplier of imported goods into the US. So if a company is for Brazilian companies that are importing into the United States, either directly from Brazil or manufacturing in Asia and importing into the United States, what are they to do considering this Biden trade policy? I think this is the time to get visibility into supply chains beyond tier one suppliers. Because of the relationship with China for companies that are manufacturing in China, are there any components or components of products that can be moved out of China into other regions? We know Vietnam is at capacity, but I think some say just, leave China completely. I think it's facile to say that. I think it's much more complicated than that. And we are seeing increased manufacturing in Mexico. And I think Latin America can benefit potentially if the tax reform goes into effect. I think we'll see even additional production in Mexico.
So Brazil is the second largest economy in the Western Hemisphere and the 12th largest in the world. Has a very large GDP of about 1.6 trillion and obviously very populous at about 214 million. Brazil, as others have mentioned, is a super important trade partner for the US, currently our 9th largest export market for US companies. And we exported about $54 billion of product to Brazil in 2022. We also have a large amount of foreign direct investment into Brazil, about 130 or 140 billion, much higher than any of the other countries. And as well, we received, Brazil is our largest sort of source of FDI into the United States, with approximately 192 billion of FDI stock in the US. We focus very much on promoting certain high priority sectors into Brazil. There's a long list of sectors that we work with, but some of the highest potential that we see right now are in the sectors of energy, infrastructure, healthcare, defense and aviation, where we have a lot of robust cooperation, as well as ICT. We also work in the service sectors. We do a lot of promotions in terms of bringing Brazilian students to the US for education purposes, bringing Brazilian tourists to the US, as well as promoting US franchise concepts and fintech as well here in Brazil. So, Brazil has obviously a very large consumer base. It has had in recent years a more economic reform-oriented government. Recent economic growth makes it an ideal export destination for a wide variety of US products. As everyone knows, Brazil's a large country. It's approximately the size of the continental US. And so we have very different regional markets that we focus on throughout Brazil. Obviously, a lot of the industrial sectors are down in the south and southeast, but we also do a lot in the northeast on areas like renewable, agriculture, et cetera, as well as in the north, working on mining and other sectors as well. So I lead a team of about 48 folks here in Brazil. We are located in 5 different offices in Belo Horizonte, here in my office in Brasilia. We have a group in Rio de Janeiro, and our biggest group in Sao Paulo, one of our biggest offices in the world, as well as our office in Recife to the northeast to cover that sector of the country. And all of these offices have great specialists and sector specialists who are ready to help US companies. Quickly, I'll just go through some quick overview of some of the industries that we work on and some of the latest situation with those industries. I know we're getting close to the time for Q&A, so this will be a little bit quick. But basically, one of our key areas continues to be civil nuclear. We've been doing a lot of work in recent years looking at the Angra projects. The conclusion of Angra 3, a much delayed conclusion from a project that began in the 80s. And then recently we've been working, US companies have been focusing on contracts on Angra 1 for what we call lifetime extension projects that basically means what it sounds like, an extension of that nuclear plant's viability for 20, 30 more years at least. Brazil does plan to double its nuclear power generation by 2050, and we're still waiting to kind of see with the new government the direction that it will take with that. The key question in this sector is, larger, sort of more traditional nuclear plants versus what we call SMRs, or small modular reactors, which are kind of the next wave in the civil nuclear sector. On defense, we have a defense industry dialogue that is on cooperation between the two countries' defense industries. The 3 strategic sectors we focus on within that dialogue are nuclear, cyber defense, and space. Brazil's 2022 budget for the defense sector was approximately $23 billion US, but it's a little bit misleading that seems like a lot of opportunity and funds, because a very high percentage of the Brazilian defense budget is actually allocated towards military costs, pensions, et cetera. And a few years ago, the US government designated Brazil as a major non-NATO ally in recognition of Brazil's recent commitments to increase defense cooperation between our two countries. Brazil's currently one of the only countries in the region that has that MNNA status. On education, this is a big area of focus for us. We are currently the 2nd largest destination country for Brazilian students. We work on various areas, with student exchange agencies. We do international recruiting fairs and other program areas. Currently, we have about almost 15,000 US students in the US, Brazilian students in the US, pardon me, and that has, broadly speaking, an impact of about $620 million on the US economy. So it's a very important source of what we call exports, but export of education. We're doing a lot in the environmental area. Most of you familiar with Brazil know that Brazil is one of the best countries in the world in terms of its energy matrix and a mix between renewables and carbon fossil fuel types of energy. Also very leading country in terms of use of renewables. So a lot of cooperation in the sector. We recently commenced a new clean energy industry dialogue with Brazil that we co-lead, Commerce Department co-leads along with the Department of Energy to look at cooperation in the sector.
Great. So I'll just echo that and just thank everybody. It was really interesting and timely, and we should meet back in a year to see progress that Brazil and the US have made on the trade issue. So thank you again to the Brazilian Chamber. Thank you everyone for listening, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Good job.
Thank you.